Welcome to another episode of the Family Ties podcast. As many of you know, our discussions often focus on the narrative of children within the complex web of family dynamics, the judicial system, and interactions with child protection services. My approach consistently has been to advocate for the child's perspective, which I admit has led me to view parents' stories with a certain degree of skepticism. Today, I want to invite our audience into a conversation that challenges us all to expand our understanding and consider the multifaceted nature of these stories. So, with all that in mind, I'm acknowledging my own bias up front. And, historically, I've found few reasons to align with parents in these types of conflicts based on my past experiences as an abused child. However, I approached today's episode with a commitment to keeping an open mind despite my hesitations about fully embracing a parent's narrative without question. So just telling you, I'm coming at this from a place of trying to grow as a person. So our guest today is a Suffolk County, New York resident who finds herself in the midst of a very strenuous battle with CPS for the custody of her child. I want to remind our listeners to approach this episode with an open mind. It's crucial to recognize that while we are hearing from one party, the reality of these situations is, of course, never black and white. I'll ask some challenging questions here and there, of course, striving to maintain fairness and impartiality through our discussion. As you share your journey with us, would you just know that some questions will be tough. There's nothing that you haven't been asked before. And then, the goal is just to shed light on the truth and then perhaps uncover aspects of these situations that most of us just never know about. We're just clueless as to how this process goes. So with that being said, let's hear directly from Christina. I'm going to pass it off to you.
Hi, thank you, Callie. Good morning. Good morning, audience. I'm a Suffolk County, New York resident. For those who don't know where Suffolk County is in New York, it's the most eastern region of Long Island. It's the most eastern county on Long Island. So we have two counties, Suffolk County and Nassau County. I live all the way on the east end of Suffolk County. Um, our county court judicial system, our law enforcement system, corruption ranks just as high as many other states here in the US. What I'd like to ask the audience is, with an open mind, what if you had photo evidence to show you did not do what you're being accused of, but they don't believe you? What if you had text messages to validate where and how injuries happen, and they still don't believe you? What if you gave your statement and provided a timeline of events such as time, place, distance travel, reasonings, as honest as true as they may seem, and time card information? And instead of determining you were telling the truth, they decided to take that information and use it against you and trash talk you in a findings report. What if their internal investigation done by their internal investigations department, they decide to petition to take your child? Now you have a fight on your hands. This sounds like something you're going through or went through or know somebody who has been in a similar situation. Welcome. You and I are both a victim of circumstance. You are not alone, and I know what I am one of many in a battle with CPS. My battle began on December 23rd, 2022, and to this very day, it is still going on, unfortunately. We've done everything CPS has required of us, and then some. Showed we had nothing to hide. They will let in my house, still treat me like dirt. They look at my house, they walk around my house like we live in piss poor conditions. I have a very beautiful house. I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars renovating it. I bought this house in 2012. I was a single person. I met my husband, we got married, found out I was pregnant. Said, okay, life's going to change from here because we're having a baby, ready or not, because, I'm one of four children. Not many understand what it's like having a big family, and not many, because some people come from very small families. I come from a very big family. We have a lot of love in our family. Our family is old school. When somebody in our family needed help with children, it didn't matter what you were doing. You were dropping what you were doing, whatever it was, and going to help that family member. I've done it myself. I've helped some of my cousins raise their children so they could continue to go to work.
Wow.
Um, I was fortunate enough during COVID when I had my child that I had a family member that was willing to, for a short amount of time, step up and watch my child for me so I can continue to go to work. I had to. We were in the process of trying to finalize the remodel of the house with between the contractors and the banks and everything. So we weren't even living in the house during the time that I had my child. We were living elsewhere, so we were paying rent and paying the mortgage on the house. Fine. Yeah, it
Ooh,
was very difficult for a while. We had to cut back on things, like if we didn't need it, we didn't get it.
yeah.
you know we did more. It was more about making sure our child had what he needed as far as clothing and necessities and food and everything. That was our main goal, so we could work towards, after the remodel was done, being able to leave the apartment and come back home so I could continue to raise my child. um my relative who was watching my child in the beginning while I went back to work, um, after COVID lifted their restrictions, she was given an opportunity to take back her former job. And because they were providing more money for her, she decided that she could no longer watch my child. Understandably, things happen.
Hmm.
Now it left me with either I find another alternative childcare method that was reasonably priced, or I had to leave my job to care for my child full time. And if that happened, we were not having this house remodel done because it needed both of our incomes to show that we could support the new loan that we were taking out to do this extended remodel. Um, so I went on a local Facebook community page and I put up a very specific ad looking for a caretaker, a full-time caretaker. It could have been a stay-at-home mom, preferably. Um, and I had several people reach out to me, and I interviewed about 3 or 4 people, and one of all of them stuck out. The reason being is because this person was a stay-at-home mom. She had 5 kids of her own, one teenager and 4 younger ones. Her youngest being about 14 months older than my 5-month-old at the time. We interviewed her. My husband was part of that interview. So it wasn't like I was making this decision on my own. He was with me. He got a good feeling about her. We saw her home. She had a clean home. Her kids were clean, fed. They go to school for the ones that were in school at that time during COVID. We had a lot of restrictions here on the East End. So there was a hybrid mix. Some days they were home learning, and some days they had to go into the school learning for their learning. It was very tough for everybody. A lot of child care facilities were either closed indefinitely, or they were so overbooked there was no place for me to enroll him in a daycare. And some daycares, especially in my area, they have very bad reviews. And I've heard horror stories from some moms that they're understaffed, they don't take care of the kids the right way, and they get away with it because they're just drop off points so parents can go to work. And that was not what I wanted for my child. If I wanted somebody was going to watch my child full time for the amount of time I needed to go to work, I needed somebody that was going to be able to give him the attention and take care of him properly. He was born premature. I had him at 36 weeks. I developed a condition that would have been fatal to him, and I could have gotten very sick from it. It was a condition that none of us knew would happen. I did some research on that condition. The condition was called cholestasis. It's a bile acid buildup in your system. It often happens with women who are pregnant, who have a known fatty liver condition. That's how it stems from. And it's just when your body changes, bile acid can build up, and your liver enzymes and build up to a point where you could get very sick from it, almost like sepsis.
I've had that before.
So
Yeah.
I've had to, I, with the doctor told me once I was diagnosed officially with that condition, I had no choice but to deliver him early. He was 5 pounds, 8.5 ounces when he was born. He was perfectly healthy. He didn't need NICU. I had a C-section delivering him, and within 3 days after day three, the hospital was ready to throw me out, send me on my way home with my child.
Yeah. Well, hospitals love to, it's the turn and burn. Get you in, get you out, get you in, get you out.
That's
Um,
exactly what I needed.
so I just a really quick side thing is I appreciate how in depth you get with the actual science and health issues. Um, for the audience, you sent me a very, very detailed kind of journal, kind of outlining all of this. And I just want to say I've never seen somebody who is quite as diligent as I am in taking daily notes, and not just daily notes, but detailed notes that describe everything, covering all the bases, not leaving any room for, well, you conveniently left that out of the story. There's a lot of, not every parent, I mean, especially a parent who's having to juggle all that you were juggling, a house renovation, living somewhere else in the meantime, paying rent, paying for your existing home, and dealing with an infant on top of that, and a pandemic. It's like you have a trifecta of how on earth would you have the time and capability to keep such good detailed notes. I have short-term memory loss, so I have to take very detailed notes or I miss a lot. But like this shows a lot of care. This shows a lot of like, this isn't just something that's happened and just somebody's like, well, I didn't do anything, so don't look at me. It's there's a lot of background. So I think that that speaks volumes for you, that you've been diligent. It can't have been easy to, dates, times, all of the details, and then you give science explanations into some of the things. So I'm like, this is different. So can you kind of walk us through leading up to that first event? What, was everything relatively normal? Everything was just, I mean, really hectic. What was that like leading up to this first instant?
Well, hiring the caretaker that we did, but I needed to make sure that my husband was okay with it as well, because his decision mattered to me just as much as, my decision. I wanted to make sure that we were hiring the right person that was going to give our child the attention and care. Because as a first time parent, even before I became a parent, I know how society is with scrutinizing people who are parents. And it generally stems from people who are not parents themselves, have no idea what it's like to have a child 24 hours, 7 days a week. And those are the people that have an opinion. You know, we go out in public, you're being scrutinized, whether you know it or not. And I knew that while I was pregnant, like that aspect of my life is going to change too. I'm going to be looked at, and people are going to be looking to see how I conduct myself in public with my child and with my own family as well. I've seen it happen as a single person, looking at people who are, have some kind of comment to say in regards to how somebody's disciplining their child in a public setting, such as a store or a restaurant, and there are some parents that, who've been there before, so they understand, and then there's those group of people that are like, oh my God, I would never treat my child like that. No, but if your child back talks to you like that, you'd be saying something to that child in public too, to show them that you're their parent and it's not acceptable around other people.
Right, right. Well, and I mean, as a non-child bearing female, Coming from a big family, I helped kind of, it was a lot like the Duggar family where, we helped, the oldest children end up pretty much raising the younger children. So that's my experience. And it's like people don't know what it's like. It's 24/7. You're not going to be perfect at every moment of every day. But at the end of the day, what's most important is, remembering at this point of the story, there is no ability to talk back. It's just so there is like, it's just an infant. So I feel like everything is probably are things smooth sailing up until the point of like, does this all come out of left field for you? Like everything is feeling good in the home, everybody's settling in nicely, husband may not be getting much sleep, but things are good.
So what led up to what happened with the first event? Um, we had a routine going. My husband gets up earlier than I go to work every day. Out earlier, he goes to work. He leaves before I do. We both work for the same facility. I just my day starts a little later. Um, I was the one bringing our child to the caretaker every morning, all of his stuff that he would have needed for the entire day, food, bottles, um, whatever snacks he could have. Um, and then I would drop him off. She would take him into our home. She'd get her other kids ready for whatever daily activities. I'd go to work, and depending on what day of the week it was, either I would pick him up from the caretaker, or my husband, being that he gets off earlier, he would go and pick him up. We had two cars in the car, so one of us was always going to be picking him up at the day. Um, so we had a routine going for quite a while. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. She's a great person. She takes care of her own kids. She knows what she's doing. Um, she's so lucky to have a husband that, can afford to take care of 5 children, without her having to work. And they live a couple of neighborhoods over from the neighborhood that they live in is not a cheap area to live in. Me and my husband would not be able to afford to live there. Maybe if we were still, childless, but as a married couple with a child, we would not be able to afford to live there on both of our salaries. So that just tells you right there. She lives in a very good neighborhood. Their school district is actually pretty good too. Um, so I was like, oh, this is great. I'll, keep her on as a full-time caretaker for a couple of years, and then I'll be able to transition him over to kindergarten, you know, once once he's of age to be able to do that. Well, 5 months, 5 months, she started watching my child. At the time he was 9 months, I was on my way home from work. I was stuck in traffic. We live on a very small island, so traffic, you can be doing 15 miles an hour for at least 6 exits before traffic starts to clear up.
Ugh. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Our island very overpopulated, and for a while it was okay because people were actually mandated to have to, if they could work from home, they had to be mandated to work from home. Even our facility, we had people working from home too, until some of the restrictions lifted, and half of the staff that had the ability to work from home, half came back part-time, and some stayed home the rest of the time until 100% of the restrictions were lifted, and then they safely transitioned everybody that was working from back into our facility. So for a while, traffic was very light. I was getting to work in like 45 minutes. Oh, this is great. I'm like, are we still here? Like,
You're like, this is post-apocalyptic. I feel like there's going to
yeah,
be
because
zombies on the road.
it hardly ever happens. Even at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, like I was still getting home within 40-45 minutes, or at least to the exit I had to get off of. Um, all the way up until like October and November, and And then they started, transitioning everybody. And then slowly you started seeing a lot of traffic, build up throughout the day.
Hmm.
But I was on my way home in November of 2020. It's around 4:30 in the afternoon. It may have been a little bit later because I worked till 4:30, so it had to have been closer to 5 when I got the phone call. Phone call made my heart stop. She told me that she watched my child have a seizure for about 2 to 3 minutes and then go back to his baseline. She still called the paramedics anyway. The paramedics got there after he had already come out of having that seizure. Um, they still because he was an infant, they still needed to take him to the hospital. They had to take him before I got there because I was stuck in traffic. I had no choice. So I rerouted myself and I met them at the hospital. By the time I got there, he was laying on the stretcher in triage and he was already back to his baseline. Like he was functioning like a normal person. She had him the whole day that day. They did a CAT scan on his brain. And um, after they got the reading of that CAT scan, they CAT scan read that they didn't find anything unusual, any unusual brain activity in the CAT scan. So it's like, all right. And the doctors asked the caretaker if he spiked a fever, because fever spiking like that can cause a seizure in young children as young as he was. She kept saying no, he wasn't feverish. And I know he was perfectly fine when I dropped him off. He had no indication that he was coming down with any kind of cold, even though it was November of 2020 and everybody was just worried more about COVID than anything else. Everybody was so paranoid about coming down with COVID that they pretty much forgot about everyday regular living, that other illnesses do still exist. It's not just COVID. But they weren't worried about it. They saw for themselves that he was back to his baseline, and they kept us overnight, and we went home by the next afternoon. I had to follow up with a neurologist within the hospital's group. Followed up with the neurologist, took him to the appointment. She had me do a bunch of things with him, with motor skills and whatnot, and his, following with the eye, his eye movement, his head movement, to show that he's functioning like a normal baby. So she said, okay, she's going to schedule an outpatient EEG. Okay, no problem. So she scheduled that. An outpatient EEG is a 1 hour study. They put the electrodes on your head and you sit there for about an hour while they record the readings. My husband took him to that appointment. They told my husband that 1 hour EEG didn't show any kind of abnormal activity, so they cleared him. Okay, fine. They said you can still have him go for an MRI, but he was already discharged from the hospital over a week ago at this point. So I was like, well, the CAT scan, they said, came out normal. The EEG came out normal. Why would I subject my child to having an MRI, especially that young? They have to sedate them. So you have to go through pre-op procedures to get that ready.
And you don't want to do that unnecessarily, or, if things look okay, you're like, well, if it's not
The doctors,
necessary, should we be putting him under, you know?
yes, and the doctors even said, since everything else came back normal, you don't have to have this MRI done. I said, well, this has already been almost 2 weeks since the seizure. What would that MRI show? I asked that question very specifically. And they're like, at this point, probably nothing. And I said, okay, well, then I guess we can both be in agreement that I'm not going to have put my son through, the anesthesia procedure to have this MRI done. And they're like, yeah, we agree. That's fine. They were okay with it. Because if they were not okay with it, I'm sure I would have had CPS knocking on my door the
Right?
next. So,
Yes. Yes.
and the neurologist that he saw had already cleared him from clinic. Once you're cleared from clinic, you no longer have to continue to see that doctor unless something else arises. So,
Mhm.
they had no explanation for that very first seizure other than maybe he did spike a fever and it was gone before she realized when he had the seizure. That's the best conclusion they could have come up with back in November of 2020 for that first episode. We said, okay, we didn't think anything of it. Nobody else seemed concerned about it. So we continued to, you know, have her care for our child. We felt she didn't do anything wrong. She called for medical assistance
Mhm.
and
Did she say anything that had been leading up to her seeing him, having this seizure? Did she, I mean, was that brought up as far as like, well, what was going on before, right
yeah,
before this? Did
yeah,
she have a good answer?
she had what seemed like a valid answer because she does have young children that were not in school aged yet or daycare for that. Well, daycares were closed during that. So nobody was sending their children to daycare during that from um, March of 2020 all the way up to I think they started opening daycares in April or May of 2021.
Okay.
So she said that she was sitting on the floor with her other children in a circle, and she had my child in her lap and on the floor, and he had a toy in his hand, and she was reaching over in a bin to grab some more toys for the children, and she said he slumped over like he was tired. And then she said she went to go lift him up and his body went stiff, like at the start of the seizure. So she literally was holding him while he was having this seizure, being that he was already in her lap at that time.
Hmm. Okay. Gotcha.
And that's when what she told everybody happened. Now, because her kids were so young and they had no conclusion as to how the seizure happened because everything came back normal. We took her story as the honest truth
Hmm.
because, again, as a mother, why would somebody lie about something like that? Nobody would think twice as to why somebody would lie about her kids. Every day that I see her kids, when I drop my son off or pick him up, they'd be fine. They'd be on the floor playing with each other, playing with toys or watching TV on the couch and playing with my child. And you would never think there was anything wrong behind closed doors with that family.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's no reason you would have anything to question at the moment until that was like the first time something had happened. You have no baseline, for concern. So between that and the next incident, did anything else noticeable or notable happen or occur that, jumps out at you? Like his condition, how he was doing, behaving, and then kind of leading up to the next in the timeline.
Okay, so we were very preoccupied with not only raising a son and paying rent in an apartment and paying the mortgage and making sure we were getting everything we needed for the new loan. We were leading up to the point where our house was ready to be demolished for the new construction portions that needed to be done. Um, so we fast forward about 2 years, 2.5 years. Now we're in December of 2022. December 23rd of 2022 was when the nightmare began.
Just
Well,
right
I'm
as
a little
right as
before
Christmas
that.
is coming in, you know.
Yeah.
That's there's so much like so many layers.
Actually, I'm sorry, that was not the next incident. The next incident actually happened a week, 2 weeks before Christmas.
Okay.
So December of December 14th of 2022. Again, I got to work. This time it happened in the morning. About 2 hours after I was already at work, the caretaker calls me. Said, my son just had another seizure, much like the very first one back in 2020. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, what was he doing that could have caused another seizure? Because he's not had any seizures in our care ever, or anything that looked like any kind of seizure activity. Because when somebody has a seizure, they're relatively loud. We had a friend a long time ago, an adult friend. The way they sound when they're having a seizure, you can hear it from you can hear it at least from the neck to the next house.
Wow.
She was like, she told me that he was going across the floor to go get his slipper because I told him to go get a slipper because we were getting ready to leave to take the kids to the school, because at that point one of her kids was in daycare, and another child was in daycare slash pre-K, and then the other one was in kindergarten. So it's already 9:45 in the morning at that point. So we were already up about 5:45 in the morning. I start my day. Once I hear my son wake up, I go and tend to him and I start getting everything ready, because I have a very short time window from the time I drop him off at her home to the time I have to get to work, because I have to play beat traffic. So I get to work on time.
Hmm.
So that morning, I'm getting my son ready and we leave. I get to her home. I'm knocking on the door for at least 10 minutes. Not the first time. Um, Even way before that, I had over the summer, I had learned that she has spousal issues with her spouse. So I'm like, right, well, somebody else's spousal issues aren't my problem. You have spousal issues, just don't let it hinder your ability to take care of your own kids or the one you're being paid to watch every week.
Well, and
So
quickly to interrupt you, is she a licensed like caretaker? Is she somebody who used to run a daycare and or you know, had she taken any classes and then what are the rules for that? Like you being able to do that? Do people check in on you to make sure that your home is clean and the kid you're watching is in a safe environment? Like what's that process typically like?
okay, so in New York, you are allowed to be an unlicensed caretaker. You are only allowed to have one full-time child outside of your own children. You are only allowed to have two full-time children and one part-time child. No more than three children that are not your own as an unlicensed
Okay.
child provider.
Okay.
Any more than that, you have to be licensed by the state. You have to take CPR class. You have to also undergo a mental health evaluation and a background check. Being that she was just watching my child, to me, she was just a stay-at-home mother who didn't have to work and
Right.
that just childcare on the side.
Right.
During COVID, she made it a point that my child, being that he was an infant, was the only one she was going to be watching because of COVID and because he was under the age of 2,
Okay.
which it was fine. Okay.
Right.
Um, you can watch as many kids as you want as an unlicensed care provider if they're your own relatives.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Thank you. I had no idea what that was even like. So I'm like, is
If you want
she?
a licensed daycare in your home, you also have to be insured. You have to have liability insurance. You have to own the house. You cannot do childcare in a rented home. You obviously have to go parenting classes, mental health evaluation, CPR, and you have to pass a background check.
Okay. But in this particular case, those things didn't apply because it was under the threshold.
Yes, she
So,
always, because she knows, everybody knows that you want to do childcare routinely with more than one child, with more than two full-time children, you have to be licensed, and the state will come and check, and so will the county. They do routine checks, just like an audit. They'll show up at your home unannounced. One of my cousins, before she lives out of state now, but she ran a daycare here, from her home a long time ago, a very successful daycare. She had 12 or 13 children, and she had 2 hired outside people that were not family members helping with the childcare in her home. She was licensed, certified, CPR trained, parenting classes, passed a background check and everything. And she was licensed, and she advertised online. She had business card and everything. Ran that successfully for about 10 years before she sold her home and her family moved out of state. Now she runs her daycare out of state where they live currently. So yeah, it's a whole big process, and they have come and checked on my cousin's daycare, routine checks to make sure she's compliant with everything. They're allowed to do it, and they're allowed to do it unannounced.
but that doesn't necessarily apply if the person hasn't met the threshold to warrant that.
No,
So, I mean, most
because
likely,
you're allowed to watch children. You're allowed to watch a few children and not be licensed.
right. So, what led up to the second? So you got a call. It was earlier in the day.
I dropped my child off at the normal time I wouldn't usually drop him off so I can get to work on time. I had a phone call about 9:45. My work day starts at 8 in the morning. So I was already at work for an hour and a half. But prior to that, we were already awake about 5:45 in the morning. So my child was already awake at 5. We were all already awake and getting ready to go to her home between 5:45 and 6:30. I leave at 6:30. Takes me exactly 12 and a half minutes to get from my house to her house every day.
Okay.
So he was already up. We were already up since about 5:45 in the morning to 9:45 when I got that phone call. So
Okay.
she already had my child an hour and a half, or a little over an hour and a half at that point, before he had that seizure. So my questions to her were, was he watching something that could have triggered seizures? Because certain shows, blinking lights and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
can trigger a seizure, even if someone does not have a known epilepsy disorder.
Mm-hmm. It's possible. Yeah.
No, I told him. She said no. I told him to go get his slipper on his foot, and we were going to get ready to start leaving to go drop her kids off at the school at school, the younger ones that there's no bus service for the daycare. Okay. So it was another seizure that lasted a short amount of time. By time paramedics got there, again, he was already back down to his baseline. So again, they transported him to the same hospital. I left work, drove all the way to the hospital, but they got there about 10 minutes before I did. He was on the stretcher again. He was sitting on the paramedic's lap, crying like a normal child,
Mm-hmm.
like nothing was wrong. He was just scared because somebody was holding him that he didn't know.
Yeah, it's scary. You don't know
The
where you're
minute
at. Where's my
the minute,
mom?
the minute he saw me walk into the triage room, he opened his arms, crying, and he recognized me right away as his mom. So
So go
this
ahead. Sorry.
time they decided they were going to keep us for 2.5 days. They did a 24-hour EEG on him, in addition to a CAT scan, in addition to, now he really had to have an MRI done. So he needed to be sedated. So we went through all of that. This time they did find abnormal activity in both his CAT scan and the EEG. But they didn't see anything in his MRI images, apparently, according to what the report stated. But they still kept us overnight. They still kept us overnight for the 24-hour EEG. We got that back, and yeah, it showed that he was having abnormal brainwave activity. They told me that they still don't know what's causing it. After I asked, said, why is this happening? I'm like, me and my husband don't have a seizure disorder. We don't suffer from seizures. We don't have, we don't have a family history strong enough to have, for any family members to have a known diagnosis of epilepsy, unless it's drug induced.
Interesting. And is it typically something that is hereditary? I don't know anything. I mean, one of my aunts she has epileptic seizures, but I mean, I think she's the only one of seven children who does. So I
It
don't know.
can be, it
Yeah.
can be, but again, none of my sisters have epilepsy. Nobody on my husband's side
Hmm.
has epilepsy. My parents weren't diagnosed with epilepsy. So like we have no idea where this is coming from, unless
Okay.
it's
Okay.
just light sensitive, flashing lights. But again, she told me he wasn't near the TV to look at anything. No flashing lights, no movies or any kind of show that would have triggered a seizure like that.
Okay.
So
So,
they kept us after we were discharged. Again, I was given a referral for another neurologist a pediatric neurologist that I had to take him to. This pediatric neurologist was not the same one that he saw back in 2020. This one is one that I've never met before. He had very bad bedside manners, and he was very standoffish and rude to me. Even though COVID had already lifted almost every single restriction to the point where you didn't even need a mask, he still made it a point to make sure I had a mask over my face.
okay. Okay.
And I'm not opposed to it because I work in the healthcare industry, and I will wear a mask when it's warranted and needed.
Hmm. Yeah.
My job, thankfully, doesn't consist of having to be near patients because I don't do patient care in
Right.
my husband, however, he still has to follow those mandates because he does do patient care, which, we get it. We understand the whole
Yeah.
protocol. We
Right.
live through it in the healthcare industry that we work in.
Yeah, you have more of a understanding of that than most people do by having, by working in that industry. You're like, hey, it's kind of my wheelhouse. I kind of know
I mean, yeah, and
what's expected.
I understand that some of their and I was very objective to some of their regulations of why, the people that don't even need to go near patients still had to wear a mask. But, we all sucked it up and we all got through it together. And yeah,
Hmm.
everybody's still getting COVID. But again, that's just, my opinion out of many,
Hmm. Yeah.
but I will wear a mask when it's warranted. Um, he could not do a, a thorough evaluation of my child because my child just gotten out of the hospital and having to deal with other doctors that he didn't want near him. He didn't want this doctor near him either. And I don't blame the kid one bit. He was all over me, telling me, Mommy, get this guy away from me. I don't want him near me. Mommy, please put me back in the car. I want to go home. My child is very verbal. he is very, very outspoken and verbal when he needs to be to make a
Hmm.
point. He
Right.
just did not want this doctor near him, no matter how much this doctor made a really good attempt at trying to interact with my child. My child just did not want anything to do with that doctor. Um, I ended up having to cut that appointment short. I made it a point to the doctor that I was calling the hospital, the neurologist at the hospital who evaluated my child while we were there, for another referral for a different neurologist. So he did not like, he was very irate in the fact that he said, well, if I leave and my child doesn't get a proper evaluation, he could have another seizure and it could be worse than the next one. I'm like, okay, but the point is, they wanted me to put him on a medication that if they couldn't tell me exactly why his seizures were occurring and that this medication they were putting him on, I did research on it previously. It's not even guaranteed to work on children under the age of, I think, 12. There's not enough studies to even determine that it works. Yeah, it works in a short term where they put um drug addict babies, newborns on it to help calm their brainwave activity.
Mhm.
Otherwise, yeah, they could die from having a seizure.
Right. Right.
But like, these are just sporadic seizures, and they wanted me to start him on a medication, but yet they couldn't tell me exactly why my child was having these seizures and what's going on that could possibly, prevent them from happening. They just wanted to put him on medication and say, okay, well, just put him on this medication and we'll just keep monitoring him. Well, that doesn't give me a valid answer as to why this is happening if they can't exactly say, yeah, he's developing a seizure disorder as a toddler. They couldn't
Mhm.
even tell me that because they just didn't know what was exactly causing these seizures at that time. And I'm like, I left with my child. I left that neurologist. I got in my car, buckled my child into his car seat, called the hospital. I had to leave a message because it was already after 3 o'clock. Doctor wasn't around to give me yet another referral that I can make an emergency appointment because it was already Thursday afternoon at this point. Friday, the next day, I had to go back to work, or I would have had to stay home with my child and call another neurologist, which I had intended on doing the next day. Once I did get that information from the doctor, they gave me referral for two other neurologists. And being that it was already past 4 o'clock when they returned my call, there was already other air. They were already closed for that. Um, my child did start complaining that his legs were hurting, and I'm like, that's odd. Like, nothing on his on in his legs were disjointed where that would be causing him any pain, but yet every time I picked him up he would scream like I was squeezing him too hard. So I decided that in that afternoon, since I was off the rest of the afternoon, I took him to urgent care. Urgent care evaluated him, and he doesn't have no fever. They did his vitals, and they made him run up and down the hallway to see how his motor skills were. They said, well, he's running and walking like normal. I'm like, well, why every time I pick him up to hold him, is he complaining that his legs hurt? They didn't have an answer either. So I ended up just going home for the rest of the day with more questions than I had answers.
Hmm. But at this point, just to remind everyone, you've followed all of the advice of the doctors. There is no hesitation to pursue medical help. There's no hesitation to pursue second opinions even. There's a full cooperation going on here at this point, with everything that's kind of occurring to try and get answers. So, what is the next between this and the next event? What
So
what's
that
going on?
That neurologist appointment was on December 22nd. I took him back to the caretaker on, that was a Thursday. The next day, Friday, December 23rd, I dropped again. We were up about 5:30 in the morning, because around that's the same time around that my husband gets up to start getting ready. My son woke up around that time because he heard daddy in the bathroom. So I said, okay, guess I'm getting up at 5:30 too. Start my day ready. Made, made something to eat for my son, because I don't bring him to the caretakers. I've never brought him to the caretakers without him eating something in front of me. Even though I bring a bag full of food and snacks and drinks, sorry, I always made sure that he ate right at, not long after getting up, because, a hungry baby is a very cranky,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
once I get up, I have to eat about at least 30 minutes after waking up, or I can become a very cranky adult too. I just
Yes.
my blood sugar can drop within an hour if I don't eat within the first 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, same routine. Pack the car, pack my child, pack myself, get in the car, drive to the caretaker's house. Now, I get to the caretaker's house. Here's the thing. The entire neighborhood is pitch black. I'm like, that's odd. They have street lights. Why aren't street lights on? It's not late enough in the morning yet for them to go off automatic. I didn't know that they had a power outage in their area, because it didn't affect my area being about 8 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
So I got out with my child and his stuff, went up to the door, started knocking on it, knocking on it, knocking on it. 10 minutes, I'm knocking on the door, and I'm like, I'm going to be late for work. And it's still pitch black. So I put my son back in the car. He wasn't too happy that I had put him back in the car. So I drove around the block with him, just to calm him down, because it's early in the morning. People are still sleeping, and, a very quiet neighborhood. You scream and it sounds like, it echoes.
Yeah.
So I drove around the block. By the time I got back around the block, the power outage went back on. And by then, another mother whose child she also watches just long enough to put the child on the bus in the morning, because that child was school age. It's the same school age as her own daughter. The mother works in one school district. They live in a different school district. So she only has that child for a couple of hours before she puts that child on the bus. And that child gets on the bus to go home to her own home at the end of the day. She doesn't get that child off the bus. So that mother also just arrived just as I was dropping my child off to the babysitter, because by the time I got there, the babysitter finally opened up the door when I knocked. So she asked me a few questions regarding my son's seizure, and I said, well, I have another doctor's appointment I'm making another appointment with another neurologist. I did not like the other neurologist that he went to. I got no answers. My child did not want to cooperate. So he couldn't even do a full evaluation. And I said, as far as his seizures, if he has another seizure, according to the hospital discharges, if it doesn't roll him on his side, if it doesn't last more than 5 minutes, you don't need to call the paramedics, especially if he goes back to baseline. Well, she took that and she decided to use that statement against me, and we'll get to that in a little while.
Mm-hmm.
So I left, and the other mother was walking up the driveway with her child. I waved to her. I'm not friends with her. I don't know her personally. I just know her from seeing her drop her child off in the morning, and I know that she just puts that kid on the bus. I left to go to work. I got to work and I parked my car. It was about 5 after 8. I just closed the door to my car when I got a phone call coming in on my phone, and it's the caretaker. I have to call paramedics. Your child is having another seizure and it hasn't gone away yet. It hasn't stopped yet. This is why I said I have to call paramedics regardless of how short or how long a seizure is. And I'm like, what is going on that he's having these seizures in your home, but he's not having them in my home with me or my husband? And I
Right.
said, call paramedics. I have to go call my supervisor and let her know that I won't be in and I'm rushing back to the hospital, and I'll meet the paramedics at the hospital. I'll try and get to the house. If I don't get stuck in traffic, then I will meet the paramedics at the hospital. Well, I got a phone call 3 times from the paramedics asking where I was. I said, please, I already told one paramedic I don't need a second paramedic calling me. I am sitting in traffic. There is an accident on the expressway and I can't get through. I
Right.
said, if you have to leave with my child, just go. I will meet you there. Well, they took my child. By the time they got there, they had just walked the stretcher out of the hospital. So they had just gotten there with my child as I was getting out of my car. Ran into the hospital, told them who I was. The security guard brought me back to, again, the triage area. There is my child, white as a ghost, laying on the stretcher, having an active seizure. It is the first time I have ever seen my child have a
That's
in the
scary. That's got to be pretty scary
2 years,
to just see happening.
in the 2 years, and he was 2 years and 9 months at that point. It is the first time I had ever seen an active seizure like that in a child.
And are
So
there any tests that they can do to see, like, have there been seizures in the past that you just didn't know about? Or, is there any way to even check that? No?
not
Okay.
unless they're actively having it or they just came out of it.
Okay.
The
So at this
brain,
point, what happens?
at this point, the nurses come in. They're hooking him up to IV. He had a bowel movement, so while they were doing that and doing blood work, I was changing his diaper.
Mhm.
He was still actively having the seizure. I'm sitting on the stretcher, holding him in my arms, and he was as limp as a sack of potatoes at that point by the time he stopped.
Oh.
Um, the neurologist came in with the triage doctor, said, we're going to be transferring you to this children's hospital. This children's hospital is a very well-known children's hospital. It's a state hospital. They have county, they have Suffolk County Police Department activity all around that place. And they have security cameras. So you go into this hospital, you're being watched.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a big hospital. It's not a teeny tiny hospital. It's got several buildings. It's got several wings, and each wing has several different floors of its own.
Right. So everything's
And
pretty closely monitored. If you're like, I was here at this time, if you need confirmation of any of this, it should be on video.
exactly, yeah.
Like, there you go.
And
Okay.
they also have outpatient clinics that run out of that hospital as well. So it's
Okay.
not just the hospital. There's other outside clinic facilities that are part of that hospital within that hospital too.
Right.
Um, so I said, great, this is just wonderful. How am I explain this to my husband now? My husband was halfway to the first hospital we were at. He ended up with a flat tire on the highway trying to get there. So he never made it to the hospital that we were at before we got transferred to the next hospital, because the next hospital we were going to deals with children and trauma. So they get all the paperwork ready. They did some more EEG. No, they didn't do EEG, but they did do CAT scan again and MRI again. before we left, and they transferred all of those documents over to the next hospital.
Quick
The
question though,
ambulance,
did they have the other scans that were done like at least like the first time around to compare these two? Was any of that kind of referenced in any
not
way?
at that, not at that time. I'm pretty sure the second hospital we were transferred to did probably request, I want to say they did request his records back from the very first event, because the neurologist would have also needed that to see why it took 2.5 years for him to have two more seizures, literally a week back to back.
Right, right. Okay. So, in between the two that went back to back, there was how much time in between those?
The two back to back.
The first one happened
Very
and then
first
the
one,
second one. What
2020,
was the time frame between the first and second?
about 2.5 years.
That's decently long amount of time in my books. Anyways, so then what happened next?
We got transferred. We were taken by ambulance to the second hospital, the specialty hospital. Um, they did an entire workup. They did CAT scan. They hooked him up to an EEG. Um, they also had to hook him up to IV because they started him on Keppra, which is an epileptic anti-seizure medication.
Hmm.
At that point, I had no choice. Um, they did more MRIs. They did MRAs, which I don't know the difference between MRI and my special my knowledge of those two things. I know what an MRI is because
Hmm.
I've had them done. I've seen them. I don't know what an MRA is. Um, it's another imaging test, probably similar to an MRI. I want to guess. I could be wrong. They also did more CAT scans. They also did an entire body X-ray of his entire skeleton to make sure that there was nothing broken, nothing fractured. They also did more blood work, and they also had a team of ophthalmologists and a team from neurosurgery come in and evaluate him. They asked me a few questions, told them exactly what the caretaker told me happened that day too. That day, she claimed my child was sitting in her kitchen with a little cardboard box just playing with it. She told him to get up and get ready to go get his jacket to get ready to go. Now, at that time, I didn't ask her what time that was. So, because I was more worried about what's going on with my child rather than a timeline at that point.
Hmm.
And she said he stood up, looked at her with that glossy type look, and she knew immediately that he was going to have another seizure. That's what she told everybody. She stuck to that story with the paramedic and the doctors that I met with at the second hospital, because even they wanted to know what he was doing
Yes.
before that happened.
Yeah.
I got her on video chat the first time, and then because she was in her car just dropping off a child at school, she had to go home and then call me back again from a regular landline phone. Again, we got the doctors, put her on speakerphone, and she told the doctors exactly what she told the paramedics and me, that he was sitting on the kitchen floor playing with a little cardboard box, and she told him to get up to get his jacket because they were getting ready to leave the house. And she said he stood up, that glassy look, and she said that was a right after she saw that, he immediately started having another seizure. That was her story the entire time. So the ophthalmology team came in, did their eye test on him, um, and then the nurse manager or some nurse manager came in and asked me what might also asked me, about my day and what happened the morning before I dropped them off at the caretakers. So I told her I was up at 5:30 in the morning. I'm up at around 5:30, 6 o'clock every morning because I have a very short amount of time from the time I get up to the time I have to drop him off and get to work. And we've been doing this routine since he was 5 months old. Told her about the first seizure he had in 2020, then explained the second one, what she said happened during the second one. Seems valid enough that I'm not hiding anything when this is what I'm being told, because this child is not in my care when these seizures are going on.
Mm-hmm.
So if anything malicious was going on with my child to cause these seizures, it was going on in her home.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's what it would seem, you know?
Yeah, according to, how I see it.
Yeah.
So the nurse manager said, okay. She leaves our room. And I said to myself, like, I think we're going to be here for a while, because he had MRIs done. He had a CAT scan done, and they had told me they were hooking him up again to another EEG. And he had an eye exam done by an ophthalmology team. And I just had a meeting all in one day with neurosurgery. And I'm like, why would I have to deal with neurosurgery? Well, they didn't tell me that what they found in his MRIs was consistent with trauma at that. And I'm like, but she didn't tell me he hit his head on anything. And you can see that there was no bruising, no nothing, no swellingness of any kind anywhere on his head or on his face that would cause that. What they found in his MRIs was severe acute trauma. He basically had fluid floating around his brain.
Mm.
Severe enough that it could have almost any more of it, of whatever caused that, could have given him brain damage or killed him.
But this damage and this trauma didn't show up on the first CAT scan or EEG that you guys had done, right?
According to the reports, it didn't.
Okay. So do you think someone maybe missed something on their end, or did this happen in between one and two?
Bingo.
Okay.
Yep. We're in court because part of that evidence was missed in the reports. Our attorneys hired, I have a team of attorneys. This is how severe it is. They're treating our case like it's a high profile case in court. I have
Wow.
high profile attorneys working for us. They,
Wow.
I, before the whole court stuff happened, I got a visit from a second time from the nurse manager with another woman who identified herself as a CPS case investigator. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was, hi, how can I help you? And why are you here? Because I already told them what went on before I dropped my child off. So I'm like, what is this about? I'm like, am I going to need an attorney? Oh no, we just want to ask you some questions, and I just want to get your intake on what occurred prior. She's like, the hospital called us and we're here to investigate an allegation of non-accidental trauma
Okay.
consistent with abuse. And I looked at her. I'm like, I'm sorry, excuse me? And I said, okay, so what do you want to know? She's like, well, first I need you to sign this affidavit that if you're going to record us, that we have it on file that we know you're recording us. Okay, fine, hand it right over.
Yeah,
At
let's
that
do
point,
this.
my husband had already arrived, so he was with me. to hear this investigation go on. So she read the entire statement from the hospital of their findings after I already knew. Before she arrived, the nurse manager or one of the doctors said, "Well, we found trauma." I'm like, "Trauma?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Like, they were literally classifying it as shaking baby syndrome.
Okay, so that was going to be my question is like if they're coming at you with these assumptions, which is it seems like that's what it is because it's like did they say specifically this type of trauma is only indicative of if a child has been shaken or if a child has hit its head? Did they already have a narrative in their head as to what they think actually happened? Because it seems
Yes.
like you would have to most investigators who are investigating an actual crime scene are they're making assumptions based on what they see. So what did
Yeah,
they
that's
say
why
was
they
revealed?
that's why they did all those tests that they did to come to a conclusion, and they did other extensive blood work that concluded that whatever was going on in his brain that caused those seizures and that kind of injury or that kind of activity in his brain was not genetic of any kind. Um, so they classified it as my child was abused, and being that he had no marks on his body anywhere, no broken bones, they classified it as shaken baby syndrome. That's one of the reasons why the ophthalmology team was looking behind his eyes. They found not only brain hemorrhaging when they saw in the MRIs, but they also saw ocular hemorrhaging, which is consistent with shaken baby syndrome. There's very few genetic abnormalities that a child is born with that will cause ocular bleeding. And the ones that are, those children don't live past infancy, and they are very, very rare.
Wow. So as this is all unfolding, um, did you at any point ask, well, if this is what you guys are finding, why wasn't this found the first time around that he had, after the first seizure? Because I would have wanted to know then. I could have, removed him from the care he was in if that was a worry that we were concerned about. I would have immediately removed him and, this wouldn't have happened or likely wouldn't have happened type of thing.
Exactly, correct. And I did ask that, and nobody, because he had those MRIs and those CAT scans done at a different hospital that doesn't specialize in in child in children with potential seizure disorders or head injuries of any kind. Their technology, I guess, was limited, or somebody just didn't do their job right.
Because do you think that this would have been the same diagnosis if other tests had been run or if someone else had maybe done the imaging? Like, do you think that that would have been something? Do you think that was something that existed at that beginning state, or do you think that just came slightly later?
That came slightly later. And the reason it did is because there's a difference between a forensic neurologist and a regular neurologist. A forensic neurologist will look at every single aspect of an image in depth as much as they can. A regular neurologist will only look at what they can actively see. Uh, I'm not a I'm not an image reader. I know the reports get read by somebody else. Like when you go to an outside imaging company, you get the image done and it's read by a reader that can read and understand what they see within images like that. Same thing with an X-ray.
Mm-hmm.
X-rays X-rays are very common for misdiagnosis or seeing fractures or breaks that aren't really breaks at all, but happen to be something that may look like a break, but it really isn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or it is, but it's so fine that the person looking at it immediately can't see it. But we didn't find out those answers until after a pediatric neurologist was hired. And this is also, that's part of my evidence for my trial, is the fact that somebody didn't do their job right in November of 2020 when we had that CAT scan, because that would have given me the answer in the very beginning, and she probably would be in jail at this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I gave the statement to the CPS investigator, because again, why would I hide something like this, especially now that I know that now CPS is involved and they can potentially take my child at any given point, and now I'm going to be under investigation for something I didn't even do.
Right.
So they're like, okay, thank you for your, after we gave our statements, I have it recorded. Thank you for your time. We'll be in touch. And she already made a comment stating that they were going to put this in the hands of a caseworker, and they're most likely going to petition to temporarily remove my child, because they can't validate until that I'm telling the truth until they finish their investigation. So now here's the start of the CPS investigation. Their investigation went as far as going to the babysitter's house, asked her a few questions. She gave her statement as to what my child was doing. It was barely a whole page long. Said, okay, thank you. They took that. When they told her her during her interview, they told her that an injury was found in my son's brain consistent with shaken baby syndrome. She immediately told them that she doesn't abuse children, that whatever abuse that happened before I dropped him off. Well, they put that in their investigation. They decided to take that and run with it as she was telling the truth, because when you're a caretaker of any kind for children or adults, your first job as a civil servant is to report abuse. So they took it that, oh, she's reporting abuse, not that, oh, how do we know she's telling the truth? Now it's a he said, she said thing.
Mm-hmm.
So after they did their investigations, the county police detective went to her home also to get a statement from her. Her story to the detective was that my son was brought to her sleeping.
And is that consistent with what she'd
She,
said the first time?
nope. And that she tried to wake him up, and he looked very lethargic, and something didn't look right about him, and just rambling on these things that, didn't seem right. And this was after she had already told the CPS investigator what went on. Didn't mention the child sitting down playing with a box in the kitchen before she told him to get up and go get his jacket. She also made a statement to the detective that I wasn't consistent with what, the doctor had told me that I needed to do. And she told them that I told her not to call the paramedics if he had another seizure, and that I was acting funny. Like I wasn't acting like a normal person would. And that she told her quote unquote husband that she wasn't even sure she should be watching my child anymore. She thinks that there's stuff going on in my home that may be harmful to my child. Oh yeah, she really poured it on to this police detective.
Mm-hmm. The
She also,
second that she could, I mean, that's not the behavior of someone who's above above reproach, because it's like, if you have nothing to hide, you'd be like, "Oh, I don't know what's going on at home." Like when she's dropped him off, things have seemed normal, or else I wouldn't have kept him here, and then these things happened. But it's like trying to
but
explain away with some
yeah,
often
and this
very
is
unnecessary details.
and this is coming from a person who's watched my child for 2.5 years. If in 2.5 years you didn't think until recently when these seizure things were going on that I could possibly be consistently abusing my child at any given point in the 2.5 years she was caretaking for him? Why didn't she report me to CPS in those 2.5 years?
Yeah,
Why now?
exactly. Yes, that is the question. That would be the question. And if it is going to be a he said, she said situation, then I think it behooves whoever's investigating this not to necessarily take at face value what either of you guys says, to be
No,
honest.
they did. They did, and they ran with it because she has a title as a caretaker. And she's got 5 kids. Why wouldn't they believe her story?
So here's a
Why should
quick
they
question
believe the
before
mother?
you
Yeah,
before
why
you
should they believe the mother with one child and almost $500,000 home and that can pay their bills without batting an eye compared to the stay-at-home mother who's known in her own community to be very standoffish and obnoxious and treats her husband, who pays for everything, like dirt, provides for his children, works 6 days a week, and gets verbally attacked by her. And she has all her friends. She had me believing it too, that her kid's father is nothing but a deadbeat, do nothing parent, and that she has to fight with him for money to pay bills and do stuff and provide for the kids, and that he barely provides the basic necessities for them on his own accord. She has all her friends that are still friends with her that don't really know what really goes on behind closed doors. She has friends brainwashed. She had me brainwashed for a while too.
have you
Because
ever considered asking the husband and just saying, these are the things that she said
yeah,
about you? Are you okay with that? And is that true? And if it is true, or if it isn't true, can you prove it? Not that you owe me an explanation, but you know, I'm losing a lot of rights here, and I want to make sure that, I have all the information that could possibly help me out here.
here's the thing: yes and no. No being because if somebody told you that about the father of their children, would you be likely to want to talk to that man?
No.
Probably not. Yeah,
Hmm.
I felt the same way because the few encounters that I did have, he's very quiet person and avoids conversation with anybody, knowing that she goes around and because she tells everybody that story, so he already knows that she paints him a bad picture to everybody she meets. So
Wow.
why would I wanted to have talked to him? And the few encounters I did try after this whole legal thing with CPS began, I reached out to him to see if I can get some answers.
Hmm.
The response I got from him was not a very polite one, to say the least. He blew
Okay.
me off the first time. And then he blocked me from contact. My only point of contacting him, because I didn't have a cell phone number for him, was Facebook.
Hmm.
So I said maybe I have to take the fact that you know he has to provide for his children. She wouldn't be living in that kind of house. And after it dawned on me that he blew me off like that, I was like, wow, he's really going out of his way to protect the mother of his children. or maybe he has something to hide too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That's always kind of at the back of my mind too, because it's like, if this person was above
Whatever
board
he
and they
knows, yeah, at that time, during that time, whatever he knows about the mother of his children, how she is, if she really is an abusive person and that she is capable of hurting a child that doesn't even belong to her, in addition to hurting her own children, verbally or physically, he's hiding it. And I was not going to get it out of him.
mm-hmm.
If he wanted to tell me anything, he was going to be the one to reach out to me. I was not going to get it out of him. And especially after the kinds of responses I got, um, about 8 weeks later, he decided out of the blue he was going to send me a message through Facebook. And I had a very short, I'm not going to describe what the conversation was about, but it was very short. Um, Basically apologizing for the way he reacted towards my reaching out to him and that he hoped my child was doing well. Um, but he didn't indicate that the mother of his children was abusive in any way toward children. She did have an encounter with CPS regarding her oldest child wasn't his child. That was previous relationship. Um, and I knew about that CPS encounter because she told me about it, and I got a phone call from the detective stating that I had to pick up my child because their statement was that she used corporal punishment a little too excessively on her oldest son. So I was like, wow. I'm like, that doesn't seem like her at that time, because I've never seen marks on any of the other kids. And I know our county police department to be very, they will make, if they want to purposely get somebody in trouble because they get a bonus out of it for saving the day, oh, they will coax anybody to make up a story to get somebody in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Just because once you're part of that legal system, the state gets money to hire attorneys for people, court appointed attorneys.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the circle of corruption, and that's only a little bit of
Yeah.
it. So I wasn't going to get out of the detective exactly what happened in detail because that's all that they would tell me. But I had to go leave work that day and go pick up my son. Her kid's father had to leave work that day to go take care of his 4 kids, 5 kids, well, 4 kids plus the oldest one that he also provides for the rest of the day.
Who called in the report about the corporal punishment? Do you know?
Okay, so with that, I didn't find out what had happened until after they released her and she saw the judge. Um, when after the weekend, I messaged her. She finally responded back, "Hey, yeah, I'm done. I finished with this legal thing I had to deal with regarding my oldest son." She said, "I'll explain it to you when you come over if you're going to drop your child off, to watch." I said, "Okay, well, I'll come over and, you can explain it at that time." She said that this was during the time where COVID restrictions still applied regarding schooling. If you were not, if it was a day that your grade level wasn't going into class, you had to log into the computer virtual to do classes virtual.
Right.
He was giving, according to what she said, her oldest son was giving her a hard time regarding logging into the computer for his online learning because he just felt like ditching class and being lazy, according to her. So she said that she called the precinct liaison. Now we have police detectives, the police chief of precincts, then you got the police, irregular police, and then you have police canine, crime scene, and police liaison. A liaison is a mediator. They go and assess a situation, such as an argument, especially when it has something to do with an adult and a child under the age of 18, because it's a minor argument. So they go and assess and hear both sides of, you know, what's going on. She asked for a police liaison to come and speak to her child regarding his responsibility as a school-aged student, because he was just being combative with wanting to log into the computer to do his schooling. So that's the story she told me. Then the reason the cops got involved and the detective was because she said her son told them that she beat him with a metal spatula. I was like, oh, interesting. How would a child just make up, children make up stories like that? I can see that being made up, being that I've never actively seen or heard from the younger children that their mother hits them abusively to the point where, it hurts them.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, that's, children make up stories like that all the time. Why would I not believe that a child would make up that story? So she said, I don't even own a metal spatula. Now, you can't search somebody's house unless you have a search warrant and a valid reason signed off by a judge to search somebody's house.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not at that time, that this spatula existed was still unknown. She said she don't own a metal spatula. She said her son made up that story to get her in trouble. And that's why, and because she said they saw she had no criminal record, they used that to get her in trouble to arrest her. And she had to face a criminal judge. She was held overnight. She had to see a criminal judge the next morning. And because we're a no bail state, obviously they had no reason to hold her because she stated to them that she didn't have no metal spatula. They're not going to issue a warrant after the fact to go validate that metal spatula really existed. They don't have the time or the resources to waste money to do that. They'd rather waste money doing other things. So I said, okay, he made up the story, and now she's under CPS investigation. She said that she's on probation for a year with CPS.
Time out. Time out real quick. My understanding of when there is intervention in these types of situations, um, they typically, from my understanding, don't escalate so quickly, and I think they're typically hesitant to take action on something unless there's visible signs of abuse, because CPS showed up to our home several times when I was young. And of course, they couldn't make it into the home because my parents were members of the Homeschool Legal Defense Association and would just call, and that means you have legal representation and
I
you.
know that. I know that. I'm very familiar with the homeschooling. I'm part of a homeschooling Facebook community for my my county.
Yeah.
I was originally going to be homeschooling my child, but me and my husband had different views on that,
Hmm.
where he doesn't actually understand, that there are, requirements that have to be maintained with the state in order to homeschool your child.
Right. At
And
least
there's
in your state.
regulation.
At
And
least
New
in your
York,
state. Not all of them.
yes, you're right. Not all of them. Our state is one of the strictest. And
Yes.
you'd be surprised some of how many parents that I've seen on my Facebook community page, for the homeschooling community page, that have stated that they've had to have intervention from the same company that you just mentioned, because their school district tries to overstep their boundaries regarding reporting,
Mm.
the curriculum and stuff like that. But yeah, I totally get it. So
Like, how
yeah,
did it escalate to her having to be held somewhere overnight? That's not a typical thing that happens if there
so she
isn't some
told me,
concern.
she when I met with the detective when I got there, she he did tell me that there were visible marks on her son that he questioned.
Okay.
And his son stated his mother hit him with a metal spatula. And the mother told the detective that she doesn't own a metal spatula to hit her child, and that her child fell off his bike riding past the fencing that separates the front yard and the back end of their front yard and their backyard, that he clipped his shoulder, and that was the mark. And the skid mark was when he fell on the pavement, he scraped his arm.
Hmm.
That's what they were looking at. And she told us that her son made up the story about the metal spatula and that she doesn't own a metal spatula, because
You
she had to
can't.
validate the fact that I already knew that that the detective saw marks on her son. So she had to validate it somehow. But
Right.
again, it was another story, being that the detective wasn't going to tell me. And she knows this. She kind of knows how to play the legal system. She
Hmm.
knows that detectives cannot disclose exact details of why they show up at somebody's home. She knows that they cannot search anybody's house without a search warrant signed off by a judge.
Well, and no one's ever thrown anything away. No one's ever tried to get rid of evidence before. No one,
But we didn't,
you
again,
can't throw away a metal spatula.
I
Anyway.
found out I found out later on, in April of 2023, when her kid's father decided to unblock me from Facebook and reach out to me. And I asked him about that day, and he said, yeah, they do own a metal spatula. She hid the metal spatula
No.
in the bedroom because, again, she knows how to play the system. They know they can't search her house
Right.
without a search warrant.
Yeah.
So it's just easy for her to take the spatula and just go, whoop, throw it in the bedroom and under a blanket and close the door,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Interesting.
she's clever like that.
Hmm. Well, I mean,
And I didn't find that out until recently.
hmm
And then I started putting the pieces of the puzzle on how she keeps getting away with this stuff. And during the summer of 2023, as stuff was progressing with CPS and they were just looking to keep attacking me and attacking me and attacking me, um, just so they had some kind of trash talk against me to justify keeping my son from me and my husband. Only they're not going after my husband like they are me, because I had more interaction with my child than my husband does, being that I was the primary one that dropped them off. And some days I was the primary person to pick my child up because my husband works two jobs,
hmm
works evening too. So they were trying to trash talk me that I beat my child behind my husband's back at night before I go to bed, to justify the injuries that took place on my son happening in my home.
So you guys have never had an actual any kind of investigation in the past. Neither of you guys have a record.
Oh,
I mean, and apparently, neither does this woman, although there is this CPS, this open.
apparently that's not entirely true, but I didn't find that out until midsummer of 2023.
Oh, okay. Well, before
Yeah.
we get to that, can you let everybody know at what point? So at this stage, you've had to find somebody to take care of your child, and be
When we
that
were
kind
being
of designated person.
yes, when we were being discharged from the hospital just before New Year's of 2023, 2020, yeah, the beginning of 2023, just before New Year, right around New Year's, um, we had to go to court on Thursday, which was, I think, the 28th of December, because they were actively looking to remove my child from our custody and place him in foster home. And I said, there was no way in hell that is happening. And I will not take the blame for something I didn't do. And now I have to prove to them that I didn't do what they're now accusing me and taking me to court for.
And how do you
So
even do that? That's the question, is how do you even go about proving any of that?
you have to convince it's a judge's call. So we went to court. What took place at court was a hearing for removal of non-accidental trauma and neglect.
And when they say
So
neglect, are they saying neglecting because you had said no to the medication at first? Like right off the
correct,
bat? That's what they're coming after? Okay.
correct, and also nutritional neglect. Well, when your kid's got a coma and laying on a hospital bed for 2.5 days out of the 8 days that we were there, and then still had no appetite to eat, your child would rapidly lose weight too. They
Hmm.
decided to wait until we were discharged to do a BMI test on him, body mass index,
Hmm.
and you know how they compare that with I guess a charting table that shows what percentile your um what do they call that, the percentage, your growth percentile. I don't understand
Yes.
how it works, but my attorney, long story short, was able to prove to the court that the algorithm that they use to determine what percentile your child range falls in as far as growth is wrong, because not every child is the same size. Not
Well, and
everybody,
he
every
was
child.
premature. So there's also that, which,
Yep,
they're
that
going to
too.
be smaller. It's going to be different. It's a whole different ball game there.
And he also got his a lot of his molars grew in late, but that's not an uncommon thing. My teeth grew in late, and we were told that children whose teeth grow in a little later than, average, they have better teeth overall as an adult.
Hmm.
I have better teeth than all my siblings because my back molars didn't come in until after I was 2.5. Same thing with my child. His teeth didn't grow in until he was almost 2 years, 10 months old at that point. By the time his 2 year molars, or what they say 2 year molars are, those didn't grow in until after he was 2.5.
And in that short period of time, regular doctor
Yeah.
visits, did anyone ever say anything? Anybody ever express any concern? Because those things would typically come up. Because, I mean, for the first few years of your life, you're kind of at the doctor, I think, a little bit more than you normally will be later on. I mean, there's a lot going on, and they want to make sure that everything is going well, baby is growing well,
And
all these
pedi-
signs are normal.
with pediatricians versus what a specialist does, pediatricians are limited as to what they can do as it is. Their job is to look at your child, make an assessment, um, measure the circumference of his brain, measure his height, do his weight, and all they do is chart it.
But if there had been signs of malnutrition or
They would have seen that. They would have seen that months. They would
somebody
have
would have
seen
said
that months.
something earlier.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And being that my child is very verbal and is very good vocabulary for a 2.5-year-old, if he was hungry, he would say that he tells mommy he's hungry all the time. That would have been a clear indication that, I'm not feeding him enough.
Hmm. Yeah,
My
exactly.
child, my child for is very advanced, not only in his vocabulary, but also his motor skills. He was putting his own shoes on the right feet by the time he was 18 months old.
Oh, yeah,
The
that's pretty
therapist,
advanced.
an occupational therapist that came to assess him during the very beginnings of this, that evaluated him just to clear him that he had no, motor skill delays of any kind after the injury and the fluid in his brain started to go away. The reason neurosurgery was involved was in case that fluid still was building up, they would have to drain it. And at
Right.
that point, I'd probably be sitting in jail not having this conversation with you guys,
Hmm. Hmm.
because they definitely found a reason to just target me and put me in jail and permanently take my child. Their goal in when this started was to take my child, put him in foster care, and call it a day. And then I would have to fight the court to get my child back. And I was not about to go through that battle. And I did everything I could to prevent that from happening. So, yes, my child was placed with a guardian, a temporary guardian. This temporary guardian has been his temporary guardian now going on 15 months. If he was in foster care for that amount of time, they'd be putting in the petition for terminating my parental rights to him, regardless if the babysitter was involved or not. Knowing that there was a babysitter, that could have something to do with this. CPS, after she gave her version of what happened to them, they dismissed her from having anything to do with my son's injuries in the very beginning of this. Our attorneys were the ones that have not given up the fact that this babysitter, if she's capable of hurting and abusing her own children, that she is capable of abusing children that don't belong to her. And that's the part that we're in the process of proving. I found out by doing my own investigation, because between the CPS investigator doing their own internal investigation and the lack of investigating work that our county investigators did through the county police, they beyond dismissed her like she had nothing to do with what happened. I decided I was going to take it upon myself and start my own investigation. Why would an investigation just stop at speaking to the caretaker who has him longer every day of the week than its own parents did?
Yeah. That was what I was going to ask next. I'm like, well, technically speaking, we spend most of our lives at work. We, even in the efforts of providing for our kids. I mean, that's the American dream right there. We work till we die to make sure that everybody can live with their basics covered, and even that feels like, insurmountable these days. Even I can't imagine. Um, so with that being said, what happens next in like your quest? So you hire these folks to do this investigation, and then do
I
they
didn't
report?
hire I didn't hire an investigator in the beginning. We have an investigator who has the stuff that I've done as far as my own investigation. Um, but after they decided that they were going to figure out a way to they even tried to figure out a way to take my child from his own guardian by citing medical neglect for his blood level for the amount of Keppra that's supposed to be in his system being low. They got that in May of 2023, and they took that right to court and made my child's guardian bring my child into court. We had a 3-day battle. We ended up losing because they did it under another judge that was not our normal judge. See, our normal judge in the beginning, she didn't see a reason for right now because of we mentioned the babysitter being involved, and they were dismissing the babysitter in front of her, nonetheless, right in front of us. And they saw imminent need to take my child from us because they dismissed the babysitter, and they weren't going to do any further investigation regarding the babysitter whatsoever, and that they saw imminent need to take my child in the very beginning. Well, they decided that they were going to play dirty politics under the table. They waited for our judge to be away, and then our caseworker got the results of that blood level. They're the ones that ordered it. We didn't. And the only thing the neurologist did, because the neurologist is the one who prescribes that medication, all she did when she saw that it was low was raise the dosage, call my guardian to let her know what she was doing, and called it a day. So no immediate risk of needing to see my child for any kind of assessment, that because his level was so low that he could possibly have another seizure at any moment. But the caseworker decided that it was imminent that my son get taken because they saw it as an imminent risk, even though his own doctor that he's been under her care for didn't. But they put up a good fight in court. They had another judge make that order to have my son removed from my guardian, and they put him in foster care. And while they were doing that, they threw me in jail because I had a warrant that they were potentially trying to serve me with, and stated that I'd been avoiding being served. Well, no one's come to my home. And if they were looking to serve me with a warrant, the detective of the precinct who has that warrant should have notified me by phone. They know how to do a background check to get somebody's phone number.
Well, they also know where you work. They know where you work and they know where you live.
But
So,
here's the thing: county, county, and state employees don't like federal government property.
What? So what is that?
They will not serve. They don't serve. They don't serve. They very rarely serve warrants. We work for the federal government.
Okay. Okay.
They're not going to serve a warrant on federal government property. They have no jurisdiction of being there.
Do they have record of like we attempted A, B, C, and D times on these
On my
plates?
door, nothing. Not one notice on my door. My child's guardian was home in my house all day, every day while we went to work. If there was any kind of notice, my child's guardian would have gotten it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the guardian's not going to hide something like that.
But I mean, because why would they? Because even if that guardian had opened the door, if someone's serving you something, you would have to. It has to be handed to the person it's meant to be handed to. Like it would have to be handed to you. He's
Only
not
if
going to.
it's after the first attempt. Here in New York, if it's a second attempt, they can leave it with whoever
Okay.
answers the door, and they can just drop it at the doorstep and walk away.
Okay.
It's
So it
never
isn't just
it's
it has
never
to.
usually yeah, it's never usually given by a detective themselves. It's usually a runner, because it's signed by the judge, and they'll usually give it to a court courier who hands. It's a process server.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I remember a previous roommate of mine that they were trying to serve a warrant to them, and I answered the door a few times. I was like, "Listen, I can tell you what time they get home from work. I can tell you, what they drive, but like, I don't know." And he's like, "We've been trying to serve this for blah blah blah." I was like, "Should I hand it off?" He's like, "In our particular case, or his particular case, he needed to hand it directly to this individual." But I do remember that and just being like, and I think they notated it too, like
Yeah, they do that
spoke with
here too.
roommate. You know what I mean?
They look at the person, they give basic demographics of what they look like and approximately how their height and weight, and they say they spoke to this person and it was given to that person. So they do have it noted,
Yeah.
but they never attempted to. They waited until we were at the courthouse and I got surrounded by the warrant squad of the court.
All of this seems very excessive to me to do before having enough evidence to be going after
Trying,
something so hard and fast.
yep, because they were trying to paint me to look like a bad mother. So they had trying to do everything to tarnish who I am. So they, if any of this went public on public media, like our local public media, they would have an idea of not being biased that, hey, yeah, the mother's blaming the babysitter and the babysitter's blaming the mother. Yeah, we can see it being the mother because we just had an incident with there was another incident that happened about 4 years ago where a child died, but this child didn't die in foster care. This child died at the hands of his own father. Father was a retired police cop, city police. He was friends with the judge, and because he had a title, he painted his ex-wife to be a psycho, and they revoked custody from the mother and gave full custody to the father. And he had everybody brainwashed that the mother is psycho and can't take care of her three children, two of them which were autistic, and one of the two autistic children was the one that, for the public to see that their father was the abuser.
Wait, this
And
sounds
he
very
testified.
familiar. Is
Even
this, I think I may have covered this. The freezing, did he freeze in the garage? Yeah.
yes, that
Yeah.
little
Yeah. Is it Thomas Valva, I think? Yeah, absolutely. That, yeah.
CPS is already on the, I don't know, can I curse?
Yeah, I
That
do all the
list.
time.
They're already on the public shit list because they refused to acknowledge that the father was abusive and
Mhm.
that not allowing the mother to have access to her children.
And she was warning them the whole time. Like, if you
And
leave the
not just
kids
her,
with him, they will end up dead.
and it wasn't just her, it was the school, the neighbors around. And here's the other thing. Remember how I said earlier on that their investigation went as far as talking to the babysitter? They didn't go to anybody else's house who may have heard or saw anything take place
Right.
at her home. I did that. I spent an entire summer after I got out of the hospital with my son because I couldn't do anything while I was there because I needed to be there with my child. After we got out of the hospital, um, my husband's attorney brought up a good point to me. And there's a reason we have two attorneys, and I'll get to that in a minute. But you're also going to laugh on how I explained that it backfired on the court. Um, his attorney brought up a good point and asked me if there's any possibility that she could have done this to other children that she has ever babysat for.
Hmm. Yeah,
And I
that's the
was like,
golden
I
question in
don't,
all of our minds, you know?
I looked at him and I said, that's a very good question. I don't know because I don't know who she's babysat for in the past. I don't know her that well. I wasn't personal friends with her before I met her. I met her through Facebook community. There were other people who knew her, tagging her in my very specific post of hiring a caretaker and what I was looking for because I didn't need any more of my time wasted of people who have can only watch him part-time or can only do certain days or certain hours. And I'm like, no, this is a full-time job. You're getting a full-time pay for doing this. I don't want to bounce my child from one babysitter to another and coordinate with several people who's taking care of my child on what day.
Hmm.
There was no having that. I was already at risk for losing my job if I didn't find another caretaker outside of family, what little family I do have here. Um, so people started tagging her name, and that's how I found her. I hired, as an employee. She had a job. Her job was to care for my son, make sure he's fed, make sure he's actively learning, all the things you're supposed to do with a normal child.
Hmm.
We would even go out of our way, if I took a day off or if my husband took a day off or something, we would still pay her for that day just because when she started, she had such good morale about taking care of my child, feeding him, making sure if he spit up or anything, she was cleaning him. I always made sure she had extra clothes and toys for him and stuff like that. And, food for him to eat so she didn't have to, feed him from her own food. And, if
Right.
she didn't want to share, she would tell me what other things he liked to eat, and I always made sure that it was packed within the bags of food stuff that I would give to her every day.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, I started doing my own investigation. My own investigation started by with knocking on one of her neighbor's doors, and thank goodness I caught the neighbor at the right time. um she said she had been waiting for me to come to her because she and her husband did hear and see things that went on over there that were not documented by the detective because she didn't mention any of that, or the CPS caseworker because she didn't mention it to them either.
Mm.
They waited. They saw the cop. They saw the detective arrive at her house. They knew it was to interview her for what happened to my child. They were waiting for that cop to come over to them, to their house. Their cars were in the driveway. You can actively see that they were home.
Hmm.
Her husband was working from home during that time. Oh, he sees a lot more of what goes on there during the day when no one is around.
Hmm. But the police
That,
didn't even go over there. Nobody went over there to talk to them.
nope, not one, not once. I was the one that did that.
So does that make what she says more or less credible, if coming forward to make a statement?
Less, less credible. It makes her statements to both that detective and that CPS investigator very incredible. And that's also what they stated is also my evidence for court. That's the reason why our attorneys went and hired a private investigator. This private investigator also happens to be a retired cop. Um, he took all of what I found and he has it to present at our trial, not just their statements, but I even went as far as getting gutsy, and I made an anonymous post asking if any mothers have had issues with babysitters possibly abusing their children in their care and then hiding what really happened by saying something else happened to cause those injuries. And I was trying to make it so I wasn't naming anybody, because she knows a lot of people know her in a good way and in a bad way. She's very well known in her community by a lot of people. And some of those people don't really know what goes on behind her closed doors. They only see what they see in about her, how she composes herself in public, which
Hmm.
anybody would say, oh, look, that's a respectful human being with four very well behaved, well groomed, well mannered children.
We were that family. We were that family, and she had everybody fooled. And, the abuse was so very bad. It's like we were just scared into silence. And, honestly, I'm glad I stayed silent because no one would have helped me anyways. We had family members try and neighbors call in and that kind of thing. But, we'd go out and she presented, everybody's like, you're just the most amazing homeschool mom. Look at you juggling all of this. She wasn't teaching any of us. Not at all. Nobody checked in on us, nothing. But yeah, she did have everybody fooled, and we were very well behaved, and we had a script, when we answered the phone, and everybody's like, they're so polite and well behaved. Well, fear is a strong, powerful motivator.
Oh, it sure is.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Her neighbors even can tell when the few times that her kids are allowed outside to play, you can tell they're acting. She puts on a good act in public.
Hmm. And that's what people
Especially
do,
those
and they
for
have
those,
something to
especially in front of
hide.
those, and especially in front of those that don't know her, as that they're not personal friends.
Hmm. Yep.
And these neighbors, like, they're disgusted by it. And again, they live in a very prominently expensive neighborhood.
So what
Like the
have they
taxes,
claimed to have witnessed?
um, can't go into detail because that's part of the evidence that the investigator has, including how I managed to find one mother with the name of a child that was mentioned on a Facebook posting that I'd been actively watching, um, an account that belongs to her kid's father. Um, he posts their issues publicly.
Yeah.
And some of those posts had my name in it, not tagged, but they had my name in it. And I'm like, yeah, well, it's got my name in it. It's got something to do with me. Guess that I guess I'll be using that.
Yeah, definitely.
So the investigator has a lot. And there was one child in particular he named, besides mine. And I didn't recognize the person's name. So I made another anonymous Facebook post on a community page that she can't see what I post because she has me blocked on Facebook. So I can mention something in her name with her name on it. Somebody will recognize her name. And if that person who knows that name, that's how she'll find out that somebody's talking about her,
Right.
especially if it's somebody that she has blocked, like me. So
Hmm.
I went back on Facebook community, on a local community page. And I said, hey, I'm looking for the mother of this child. This child sounds like it could be yours. I'd like to have a conversation with you. I had several people. Oh, and then I had to elaborate because I started getting questioned about why I was looking for the child first. And then I had to comment back, I'm not looking for the child. If you read it right, I'm looking for the parent of that child. So funny how some people can read something so quick and then make a judgment like, why am I interested in this child?
Right.
So I had to revise the post and say, I'm looking for this child's mother because this child may have been abused by a babysitter. Because the post that I found that child's name on it specifically disclosed the fact that that child was abused by his kid's mother. That was how I found out that my child was not the only one who she has physically hurt and then had CPS investigate the parent because she manages to talk her way out of it because her job as a caretaker, again, is to report any kind of neglect or abuse to CPS, like a mandated reporter. Well, she
Yeah.
takes her mandated reporter duties a little too excessively by targeting innocent people. So again, I found not one mother. I found the mother of that child. And it wasn't even the mother of that child who messaged me. It was actually a relative of hers. That relative of hers also hired that same caretaker. They were young mothers. They were only in their early 20s, single mothers, new babies. And they were both victims of being targets of CPS because of being accused of something they didn't do.
So, since you can't, really speak to the details here, whenever the next, are you planning on, I hope my dog isn't trying to get my attention because she needs to go outside. I may have to pause real quick here in a second, but just like food for thought. When will the courts get all of this information, and will it kind of factor into whether or not you're able to get your child back?
It will, yes, because here in New York, an attorney's not going to waste their time going to trial if they don't have enough evidence to say this person really didn't do what they're being accused of. If they don't have this evidence plus what the medical examiner has regarding my son's imaging and the statements the investigator took from the neighbors, they would say we don't have enough evidence to show that you didn't do this, that you're not capable of doing this before you dropped him off, and you need to make a plea deal. They would have already told me that. They've already tried because we were supposed to have gone to trial back in February. It got postponed because our case actually made record history. My husband's attorney did something very smart. That very smart thing he did resulted in our trial being a little delayed because he wrote up a subpoena to petition the state to hand over certain records of the caretakers because she had been involved with CPS. And the only way to get access to somebody else's records without that person physically handing it over to them themselves is through subpoena. See, court is like playing chess. They hand a paper to the judge saying, we want this. The other party hands paper saying, no, we're not giving them that. Now it's up to the judge to make a decision on who is going to get it or who's going to, win and say, no, we're not getting it. Our trial got delayed because they put in an opposition. They didn't want to release that information. It had to be released in a very specific manner because there are confidentiality rights that still had to be maintained. So they weren't getting every piece of dirt written about her. They were getting certain things that they were, would not break that confidentiality rule. And the judge granted it. They were given 3 weeks to hand over that information to the judge for the judge to review. And then from there, she gives whatever information that she would like, she allows the attorneys on all sides to see. Then she makes that determination. Well, that's what kind of delayed our trial being done in February. So now our trial is set for June. All of what we've gathered as far as evidence, the judge already made a ruling that what she found in the case records was not relevant to what is going on with us, because there's no active there's no active case on her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so they say. I found out differently recently. Um, so my husband's attorney said the judge told the judge, I'm sorry, but I'm in opposition with that. And the respondent mother's attorney is also in opposition to that. That's not why they requested that information. They requested that information to show that she had a neglect case open pertaining to abuse, and that he needed that information to show that it was an indicated event, and that because it was an indicated event, that she's capable of not only doing that to her own children, but to other people's children as well.
Yes. Yes.
That's where he was getting with that.
So will you know, like, in June or after June, will you have like some really definitive answers? Like, we could check back in and see where did all this go? How, where did this end up? Um, Especially since I think one of the things that I had kind of written down that I was like curious about, because I also don't know the New York laws versus like other places. I'm not 100% well versed in all of that, but I found a study and it said it's a study conducted by the US Department of Health and Human Services saying that a significant proportion of children, like 70% approximately, who are removed from their homes for safety concerns are successfully reunited with their families. And that, it's not, I think there's a really small, like less than 10% of children who are, are in a repeated cycle where that will start up again. Why do you think, CPS is working so hard from keeping you from being reunified? If that, because that is the motto
They don't want
that
to be wrong. They know what it will happen when this is done, and they are found wrong. They are so certain because they dismissed the babysitter that I am the one that did this to my child.
I feel like CPS is rather untouchable though, because of the fact that, they can have multiple stories or, like even with Thomas Valva, they can have a lot of people reporting. They can have people saying,
And the
but
mother had has a quite quite a large lawsuit against them
yeah,
because of.
but do they ever really have to really own up to what the damage that they've done? Or, especially when a life is lost and, everything is kept so under wraps because of the sensitivity of it being a minor involved. I think that helps them more than anything operate under the radar and fail families left and right for very, very different reasons.
They get a bonus, and the more children that they put into the foster care system, the more money the state gets from the federal government.
And that's so weird because it's like, for the most part, someone I spoke to, I think a year or two ago, she, I think, wanted to be a social worker. I get the distinctions slightly mixed up sometimes, and people call me out for that, and that's fair. But I know she was wanting to be a social worker of some kind. And the first thing that they were taught in training was that you're not here to save children, you're here to keep the family unit together. And that seems to be the guiding principle, which is why a lot of families get children back into really unsafe situations. So here it seems like there's a lot that suggests like, hey, we have a great home. We've given a great life. We honestly don't have any, knowledge of what's happened here. How on earth can they, justify not reunifying, especially someone as young as your child?
They find loopholes around justifying that it was the parents, just based on, in my case, like every case is different. My case, because they're treating it like this because of the Valve case, because they know they fucked up with the Valve case and they know they're getting sued. And
Hmm.
no, not that they know they're getting sued, they are getting sued. That mother is suing the agency.
I hope something comes of that. I really do. Because, yeah, she deserves some kind of, I mean, it's too late to get justice, but some kind of restitution for the pain and the suffering that this has caused. Because, I mean, your whole life has been upended. Are you comfortably settled at home and things are working out well? It's like this impacts every aspect, and I feel like they should have to answer for when they get details wrong.
Yep, they will be. But again, our our details, our investigation, and our evidence is my evidence to clear me. The jury, when this goes to trial, the judge can easily make a decision saying, "Oh yeah, I've heard that there is enough evidence to say to clear me," and they can just give me my kid back. But the judge don't want to do that. The judge wants to leave it up to the public jury to make the decision based on the evidence that I've spent gathering all summer, um to for them to make the decision. But however, that it doesn't just go as far as clearing me and I get my baby back. I want the person responsible for starting this, who hurt my child. What about her punishment?
Yep. Yep.
That's And the jury is going to see that. The jury is going to see that they wrongfully targeted me and my husband. They made several attempts to take my child, citing that I have a dangerous home. Every time the caseworker comes to my home, she walks around my house, looks at everything like we live in a piss poor neighborhood. We do not live in no piss poor neighborhood. My house does not look like a rundown house. In fact, out of all the cases my caseworker has to handle besides mine, I can guarantee you without a doubt that my house is one of the best looking houses she walks into when she has to be here.
But then again, I mean, this is the whole thing that comes with
The jury's going to want to make sure that they hear from her as well. And it's just, I've been told several times by my family, why aren't they implicated? Because it's the same question my husband asked. Why haven't they implicated the babysitter? Where's the babysitter in all this? Well, we know where the babysitter is. The babysitter's at home tormenting her kid's father and beating him down like he's a dirtbag. That's where the babysitter is. So the jury is going to want the babysitter to answer to this too.
hmm
That's how they're going to make a judgment. The detective is also looking to interview that babysitter. She keeps avoiding him on purpose.
hmm
The kid's father. He tried several times to reach out to the kid's father for an interview. He
No,
blew him
the father's
right.
terrified. The father's like, leave me out of this. I don't want to get beaten today, verbally or physically.
Yeah, so um yeah, the investigator's looking for her to come in to his office for an interview, and she refuses. She's two chances. She already blew one. The first chance was when our attorneys tried to subpoena her in, but they were hoping she wouldn't show up, and they knew what she wasn't going to show up anyway. They
Hmm.
just wanted to see what was going to happen to show that, look, now she's hiding.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Second subpoena in New York, you get 2 subpoenas. If you don't answer the second one, the next thing that happens is a detective will show up at your door with a warrant. If you don't answer that warrant, they will come and arrest you at that point. If you're summoned to court on a warrant, you have to appear. So that's what we're waiting for.
So it seems like a very, very dumb question, but I'm going to close this conversation out with this. Um, so the next steps, of course, are, the court date in June. But other than her being held responsible for this, and of course, hopefully kind of getting the blame placed where it should be, what outcomes are you really just hoping for at the end of the day? I mean, like what, give everybody just a little snapshot of what like your current life is like, and then because let me just back up by saying when people get married and they have a child, it's like those are the most special, unique, best moments of your life. Those are the core memories you're making, and you're building a home, you're building a family. And if that kind of just gets, it doesn't have to get ripped from you within the first year for that to be impactful. Within the first, well, literally any time that happens, it's damaging, it's terrible. It's like your whole life has been upended. What are the outcomes that you're hoping for, and do you think you can achieve them?
My goal is to show all the evidence that we have to clear me for something I didn't do, for the babysitter to answer to what she has done, because she lied to a state official and a county official, and that's what got her released from having anything to do with this. That's disgusting.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even do that if I tried.
Yeah, yeah.
And she did it like it was natural for her.
Probably
Can you
because, I
believe?
mean, she's had some time to practice. Clearly, this isn't the first time this is type of thing has happened. So, I mean, maybe there's a process, maybe just a little checklist she's got of. I know
No,
my mom
it all
definitely
it
had her own
takes is
checklist.
a simple, basic knowledge of how of the county's laws. That's all it takes. Everybody knows nobody should be walking in your house without a search warrant. And there better be very valid allegations behind that search warrant, because judges don't sign BS search warrants.
Mm.
And when my child does come home to me, I expect CPS to disappear out of our lives like they never existed.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope that this continues to work in the direction that, I mean, you've put in a lot of work, you've put in a lot of time and effort, and clearly it speaks to, I think, how you've documented this, and the lengths that you've been going to really get to the bottom of this really speaks to a mother that cares deeply, loves deeply, and I would assume just based on meeting you that if something had even accidentally happened in your care, you would just be like, oh my goodness, oh, that explains why he said his head was hurting, and this date something must have happened, maybe he felt like, I don't know. If you had
Yeah,
any
and our
fear.
attorneys have stated that, CPS has been called for the simplest little concussions on a child's head. Um, we were given 2 attorneys because, number one, because they were actively looking. I could have hired our own attorney at any given point in the beginning of this. I didn't have time to, because I was stuck in the hospital dealing with the doctors and what was going on with my child, that I didn't have time. I tried, but I'm like, it was too much for me to handle, with trying to find out exactly why I'm being targeted for something I didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
they gave us two attorneys because they were under the assumption that there was a domestic violence issue between me and my husband, because they concluded that my son's injury was non-accidental trauma. They thought that there was a physical domestic violence issue between me and my husband. That's why we were given two attorneys. We proved them wrong. Now our attorneys are working side by side with each other.
Good, good. I mean, and it seems as if, I do want to just kind of leave the audience with this, that you can be someone very similar to me where you kind of, because statistics will typically indicate that something like this is usually done at the hands of their mother because they are the primary care provider and they're the one who has the most access to the child, all of that stuff typically, that those statistics are
Yeah.
indicative, but that does not mean that every case is the same and you can't do your due diligence to ensure that you have turned over every stone. Because I mean, there's a lot of people who have been wrongfully accused of other crimes because they really just fit that profile. They fit the profile and it's just more convenient that way than to do the due diligence. And then you have people like Thomas Valva's father who is in thick as thieves with law enforcement, and because of that they're given special treatments, even though all of there's so much evidence against them. I think we have to remember that every case is different, and even if statistics show that they're assuming, and their assumption of that right out of the gate isn't something to be held against them. It's how they go forward with that. And, the insistence, like we've already made up our minds. This is the perpetrator and this is what happened. They already built that scenario in their mind. So you have all of this human error. We're all very biased people. I've been on a jury before and I had to keep my bias in check the whole time because I had to kind of vote against my personal bias it because of the letters of the law and what we're told to take into account. So I think we have to be a little bit more curious. And I think social workers too, they are very easily fooled by people like this babysitter who know all the right things to say to put them at ease.
Yep, she had her own caseworker that was on that case regarding her oldest son. She had that woman fooled beyond belief. And
Yeah.
of course she had us fooled too, because we didn't know who's gonna question that child, who's going to question the father of her kids. Of course the father of her kids needs her, because without her watching and taking care of the kids at home, he can't go to work. So
Hmm.
of course he's going to try and defend her in all case scenarios up until it starts to affect him. Now he's realizing it is going to affect him and that he has to actively do something.
Hmm.
Otherwise, what if his own children are going to end up in the hospital because of their mother?
Well, and also, I'm not saying this is what's happened here, but I also think we tend to be very much we're very quick to blame the husbands for domestic abuse, but domestic abuse happens often, and is often perpetrated by females. My mother was domestically abusing my father for certain. Emotionally, I don't think they ever got into physical altercations, but she was very physically abusive with us. But there we can't ignore that is possible, and that if someone is that strong and clever of a bully, that you can bully someone into silence.
And that's
So,
exactly what she does to her kid's father.
so that is something that
One
it
of my
seems.
relatives one of my relatives put up a good point when we found out that he was posting stuff, as what I have found in the last 14 months of this going on. She made a statement, and that statement still rings true. Men are very quiet people. until you piss them off enough that then they're not so quiet. Well, she said, men don't post what this man has posted if it wasn't true. And
Yeah.
what he has posted and some of what I needed to find, which helped me find several other mothers, apparently it was true. Because if I was able to find other mothers that have hired her and have gone through a similar situation regarding CPS, then I'm pretty sure that there's a lot more truth in a lot of what he states. Yeah, he does go to work every day. He was never at the house unless it was a holiday week or a
Right.
holiday where he didn't have to go in. I rarely saw that man's vehicle in at their home. And when I go to pick up my child, that man was usually never at that house.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I have a puppy right here. There's a puppy. She's done very, very well. She's new. We're adopting her from a friend who needs to rehome her, but she is very playful and she's been biting me for half of this. And
Aw.
but she's getting stronger with the bites and the jumps. Um, so we will wrap it up. But I mean, she has a cute face. She deserves to
Aw.
get a pass.
Yeah, she sure does.
Yeah, it's okay. So I'm gonna deal with her, get her outside so we don't have an accident. But I would like to follow up at some point with you on
Absolutely.
this. So please keep me posted as things happen and whatever you can or can't share. We can always circle back around in June, but I would say if any of the audience has any questions, I would suggest they, make a comment. And I'm very, very slowly getting back into trying to stay on top of everybody's comments and questions. I work a full-time job. I've been spending a lot of time doing some volunteering and stuff like that. So my free time is very, very hard to come by, but I don't want to give up. This podcast is very important to me and making sure that we cover really important topics, even ones that are tough for me to discuss. So with that being said, if you have questions or comments, please leave them. I will eventually find them. I think Christina can tell you, she reached out to me when? When did you reach out to me?
Oh my God, it had to have been close to 2 months ago.
I
I
think
don't
it was
even
before that. Wasn't it earlier than that?
maybe in maybe in January?
It was pretty early. It was a while ago, guys, and it took me a long time to see her message, and I was like, "Oh no." So I'll get to it eventually, but I'll try and pass them on to you to answer, Christina, if people have some other burning questions that I forgot to ask you. But in the meantime, um, you're in my thoughts, and I know this is difficult for you, and I'm really sorry you're going through this. This just does not seem right.
Well, the law is not fair. Justice isn't fair. The
Yeah.
whole legal system in New York is definitely not fair by any means. The only thing that makes it fair is
Yeah. And it just depends on if you have a good judge and good people. It's really a crapshoot.
she
So,
was she was a good judge in the fact she made a good judgment to decline CPS's petition to remove my son and put him in foster care. That's why he was given to a relative guardian.
good.
So this
Good.
relative guardian has temporary custody versus legal custody. Legal custody would mean that this guardian has all legal rights to my child. In this aspect, she only has certain guardianship duties. It's like being a caretaker while this is going on, and a supervisor while I'm in while I'm in the presence of my child. So um you know her guardianship duties go as far as taking my child to all the medical appointments required, making sure he's getting the medication and any vitamins and supplements that is required for him to be taking. Right now, he's in a daycare program He's doing very well, and making sure he's fed and clothed. We financially still provide for my child regarding a lot. I still pay his medical. Um, my husband is still allowed to attend his medical appointments. I am not. That was revoked from me, still pending them, giving it back. That's probably not going to happen till after trial. When my son is here, I am not allowed to stay overnight in my home. I have to make sleeping arrangements elsewhere. I can be in my home during the day for as long as I want while my child is here, but I can't stay overnight. I'm not allowed to speak to any of his doctors. I'm not allowed to make medical appointments, and I'm not allowed to have anything to do with his medication or anything in regards to what recommendations the doctors give.
Um,
Allowed to pay for his medical bills. I'm allowed to provide food and clothing and shelter and whatever other home necessities, but except for what I mentioned.
right. Okay. Well, the only other question is, have there been any other seizures or any other events in this time?
Oh. In fact, later in the year, we just got confirmation, and it's documented that his neurologist is going to be looking at ordering what she needs for the studies that need to be done to start weaning him off the Keppra, because they're aware that this was trauma induced seizures, not a seizure disorder. When in the beginning I specifically asked this neurologist, is this a seizure disorder that he's developing epilepsy? And they couldn't give me an answer.
Interesting.
The answer was, I don't know. We just have to keep monitoring him. But here's this medication for you to put him on for the time being.
Yeah.
That was it. That's all I got out of them.
Well, I mean, I think that's what most of us get out of them. They just want to throw medicine at us. Like, it's not working. Here, let me throw you
Here's
something
more.
else.
Or here's a higher dose, or here's something else.
Yeah, here's something else. Try this.
I've had it
Like,
done
I
to,
want a
I've
solution.
had it done to me. I've had it done to me too, with my own medical experience. And this is
Same.
why I'm very skeptical of some doctors' methods of treating a patient's ailments.
Yeah, 100%. Keep me posted, and thank you so much for being willing to talk to me today. I